What happens when two police officers, blinded by assumption, pull over the wrong car on the wrong day? What happens when the woman they decide to humiliate and handcuff isn't just an ordinary citizen, but a one-star general in the United States Army? This isn't a tale of simple revenge. It's a true-to-life story of power, prejudice, and the devastating impact of a single phone call. A call not to a lawyer, not to a husband, but a direct line to the nerve center of the most powerful military on earth, the Pentagon. Stick with me as we unravel how one woman's quiet dignity in the face of injustice brought an entire police department to its knees and destroyed the careers of those who wronged her. The afternoon sun of mid-June beat down on the manicured lawns of Oak Creek, Virginia. It was a town that prided itself on its tranquility, a quiet, affluent suburb where the biggest news was usually the high school football team's prospects for the fall season, the kind of place where residents paid high property taxes for the privilege of feeling safe, for the illusion of a world insulated from the harsh realities that played out on the nightly news. Driving a meticulously maintained black Lincoln Aviator was Brigadier General Anita Hayes. At 47, she wore her authority not like a costume, but like a second skin. Her posture was perfect even while seated, her hands resting lightly at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel. She was in civilian clothes, a simple but elegant navy blue pantsuit, a rare departure from the Army service uniform that had defined her adult life. Her face, framed by neatly styled black hair, was a study in composure, her dark eyes observant, missing nothing. General Hayes was on a rare personal leave, a short 48 hours carved out of a schedule dictated by geopolitical crises and national security directives. She was on her way to visit her older sister, Rebecca, who was recovering from a difficult round of chemotherapy in her Oak Creek home. The Lincoln, a recent purchase, was her concession to comfort, a quiet space to decompress on the drive from her quarters at Fort Belvoir. A few blocks behind her, a Ford Police Interceptor utility coasted along the tree-lined street. Inside, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the peaceful neighborhood. At the wheel was Officer Frank Miller, a 20-year veteran with a sour disposition and a hairline in full retreat. His face was a permanent mask of weary cynicism, his eyes scanning the streets not for trouble, but for confirmation of his worldview, that everyone had an angle, and his job was to figure it out, preferably with maximum authority and minimum paperwork. In the passenger seat was Officer Kevin Thompson, barely a year out of the academy. He was young, eager, and desperate for the approval of his senior partner. He saw Miller not as a burnout case, but as a seasoned pro who knew the real way to police, the way that wasn't taught in the politically correct classrooms of the academy. He mimicked Miller's posture, his way of talking, and most dangerously, his way of looking at the world. "Look at that," Miller grunted, nodding toward the Lincoln ahead. "Brand new Aviator. Bet the plates don't even match the registration yet." Thompson squinted. "Tint looks a little dark too, Frank." Miller smirked. It was a game they played. Find a reason, any reason. The pretext was the key. "Let's see who's driving a $70,000 car around here on a Tuesday afternoon." He didn't say it, but his tone implied the unspoken part. Someone who doesn't look like they belong here. General Hayes, glancing in her rearview mirror, noticed the police cruiser. She did a mental checklist. Speed, exactly the posted 25-minute signals used for every turn. Registration and insurance. Pristine, in the glove box. She felt no anxiety, only a mild curiosity. She was a law-abiding citizen, and more than that, a general officer in the United States Army. The police were a civilian authority she respected. The flash of red and blue lights filled her mirror. The siren chirped twice, a sharp, demanding sound that sliced through the suburban quiet. General Hayes sighed softly, a quiet puff of air. This was an inconvenience, but nothing more. She signaled, pulled over to the curb, and placed the car in park. She rolled down her window, turned off the engine, and placed her hands on the steering wheel, just as she'd seen advised in countless videos. She was trained to de-escalate conflicts on a global scale. A simple traffic stop in Oak Creek, Virginia, was hardly a challenge. The two officers exited their vehicle. Miller approached the driver's side, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. Thompson mirrored him on the passenger side, his youthful face set in a practiced scowl. The stillness of Oak Creek was about to be broken. The chain of events that would follow would not only shatter the careers of these two officers, but would send a shockwave through the town's entire power structure, reaching all the way to the highest echelons of national defense. A reckoning was coming, and it had just been initiated by a routine traffic stop. Officer Miller tapped on the driver's side window frame with his knuckle, a gesture of impatient authority. "Afternoon, ma'am. You know why I pulled you over?" General Anita Hayes looked at him, her expression neutral. Her eyes, trained to assess threats and command respect, met his. "No, officer, I do not. You made an incomplete stop at the sign back on Maple Avenue," Miller said, the lie rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. It was the oldest trick in the book, impossible to disprove. "License and registration." "Of course," Hayes replied. She maintained her calm, professional demeanor. "Officer, my registration and insurance card are in the glove compartment. My wallet is in my purse on the passenger seat. I am going to reach for them now, slowly." She narrated her every move, a habit born from years of precision and a clear understanding of protocol. Miller just grunted, his eyes flicking from her face to the luxurious interior of the car. His gaze lingered on her expensive-looking watch and the tailored fit of her pantsuit. The gears of prejudice were turning. "Take your time," he said, his voice dripping with a sarcasm that was not lost on the general. As Hayes retrieved her documents, Officer Thompson, from the passenger side, shone his flashlight into the back of the vehicle, despite the bright afternoon sun. It was a pure intimidation tactic. "Anything in the car I should know about, ma'am?" Thompson called out, his voice an octave higher than Miller's, trying to sound imposing. "No, officer," Hayes said, her voice remaining level as she handed her license and registration to Miller. Miller took the documents. He glanced at the driver's license. Anita Hayes. Then at the registration. Everything was in perfect order. The vehicle was registered to her name at an address in Fort Belvoir. This should have been the end of it. A warning, perhaps a fake ticket to meet a quota, and they'd be on their way. But Miller wasn't satisfied. A black woman? In a car like this? In this neighborhood? It didn't fit his narrow view of the world. The Fort Belvoir address pricked at his ego. He saw it not as a sign of a distinguished career, but as a potential red flag. "Fort Belvoir," he said aloud, tapping the registration. "You military?" "Yes, officer," Hayes said simply. She saw no need to elaborate. Her rank was not a shield she deployed for traffic stops. Miller's lip curled into a slight sneer. "What are you? A supply sergeant? A cook?" The condescension was palpable. For the first time, a flicker of cold anger sparked in General Hayes's chest, but she kept it banked, hidden behind a wall of discipline forged over 30 years of service. To react would be to lose control, and she never lost control. "I'm an officer in the United States Army," she stated, her tone firm but still respectful. "An officer," Miller mocked, sharing a look with Thompson. "All right, officer. We've had a report of a vehicle matching this description involved in a series of residential burglaries in the area. I'm going to have to ask you to step out of the car." This was a dangerous, calculated escalation. There was no such report. It was a fabrication, a pretext to assert dominance. General Hayes's internal alarm, the one honed on battlefields and intense diplomatic meetings, went from yellow to orange. "Officer, with all due respect, your reason for stopping me was an incomplete stop sign. Now you're mentioning burglaries. Am I being detained or am I free to go?" The legal precision of her question infuriated Miller. He wasn't used to being challenged. "You're being detained for questioning," he snapped. "Now step out of the vehicle, slowly." Recognizing that arguing would only make the situation worse, General Hayes complied. She exited the Lincoln, her movements deliberate and graceful. She stood tall, her 5'9" frame radiating an aura of command that seemed to utterly elude the two officers. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back," Miller ordered. A line had been crossed. This was no longer a traffic stop. This was a deliberate act of humiliation. "Officer, for what reason am I being placed in restraints?" she asked, her voice now edged with steel. "You have no probable cause. Failure to comply and resisting arrest will be added to the charges." Miller said, his voice rising. He was losing control of the encounter, and he knew it. He grabbed her arm. Instinctively, General Hayes's body tensed. She didn't pull away, but the muscle memory from decades of combat training made her as solid as a rock. Miller interpreted this as resistance. "That's it," he yelled. "She's resisting." Thompson, a shot of adrenaline coursing through him, moved in to help. Together, the two men wrenched General Hayes' arms behind her back. The maneuver was clumsy, unnecessarily violent. Hayes did not fight back. She allowed them to manhandle her, her mind already shifting from the tactical to the strategic. She was documenting every word, every action, every procedural violation. The cold, metallic click of the handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed in the quiet street. The polished steel bit into her skin. Neighbors, drawn by the commotion, began to peek through their windows. A man walking his dog paused on the sidewalk, his phone raised. Officer Frank Miller, feeling he had finally regained control, pushed her toward the back of the patrol car. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, spouting the Miranda warning with a smug, triumphant tone. Brigadier General Anita Hayes sat in the back of the police cruiser, the cheap plastic of the seat digging into her back. She looked through the window at her car, parked elegantly by the curb. She saw the faces of the curious onlookers. She felt the tight grip of the cuffs. She was being treated like a common criminal in the very country she had sworn an oath to defend with her life. The anger was now a frozen, crystalline thing in her chest. Miller and Thompson thought they had won. They thought they had put a woman they deemed out of place in her place. They had no idea they had just handcuffed the United States Army. They had no idea what was coming for them. The inside of the patrol car smelled of stale coffee and cheap air freshener. Officer Miller got back in the driver's seat, a satisfied smirk on his face. He looked at General Hayes in the rearview mirror. "Not so high and mighty now, are we?" he muttered, loud enough for her to hear. Thompson slid into the passenger seat, flushed with excitement. "She was tougher than she looked, Frank." "They always are," Miller replied, starting the engine. He made no move to drive away, letting her sit there, a public spectacle. This was part of the punishment. General Hayes ignored them. Her mind was working with chilling clarity. She was processing the series of events, identifying multiple violations. The pretextual stop, the illegal expansion of the investigation, the false claim of resistance, and the arrest without probable cause. This wasn't just unprofessional, it was illegal, and it was an affront to everything she represented. After a few minutes of stewing in their perceived victory, Miller turned around. "You get one phone call when we get to the station. Better make it count. Call your lawyer, or your boyfriend, whatever." General Hayes looked at him, her gaze so direct and powerful that Miller momentarily felt a pang of unease. "I'd like to make my call now," she said. Her voice was calm, devoid of pleading or anger. It was a simple statement of fact. Miller scoffed. "That's not how it works. You wait till you're booked." "The law states I am entitled to a call at the earliest possible opportunity following my arrest," she countered, her knowledge of the Uniform Code of Military Justice bleeding into civil law. "Refusing my right to counsel, or in this case my right to a call, is a further violation of my civil liberties. I would advise you to comply, officer." The precision of her language, the sheer confidence in her tone, finally planted a seed of doubt in Thompson's mind. He glanced at Miller. "Frank, maybe we should just let her make the call?" Miller, annoyed at being questioned, grunted. "Fine, whatever. Don't want to listen to you whine all the way to the station. You got a number?" "Yes," she said. "I'll need you to dial it for me. It's a Washington, D.C. area code." She recited the 10-digit number from memory. Miller pulled out his personal cell phone, not wanting to use the official police line, and punched in the numbers with his thumb. He hit the speakerphone button and held it up. "Who you calling, the president?" he sneered. The phone rang twice. A crisp, professional voice answered, a voice with no hint of warmth or casualness. It was the sound of pure, unfiltered bureaucracy at the highest level. "Office of the Secretary of Defense, Operations Division. Captain Wallace speaking." Miller's smirk froze on his face. Thompson's eyes went wide. They exchanged a panicked look. This was not the number of a local lawyer. "May I speak to Director Croft, please?" General Hayes said, her voice carrying clearly into the phone. This is Brigadier General Anita Hayes. Authorization code Sierra Tango 9090. There was a brief pause on the line. General, one moment. Patching you through. The sterile hold music didn't even have a chance to play before another voice came on the line. This one was deeper, more authoritative. This is Robert Croft. Robert Croft was the Deputy Chief of Staff for the Secretary of Defense, a civilian political appointee with immense power, a man who could end careers with a single email. Rob, it's Anita, General Hayes said, a sliver of familiarity now in her tone. I'm afraid I'm in a bit of a situation. Anita, what's wrong? Your line is breaking up. Where are you? I'm in Oak Creek, Virginia, she said, her voice steady. I'm currently in the back of a police cruiser in handcuffs. I've been wrongfully arrested by 2 officers of the Oak Creek Police Department. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Officers Miller and Thompson sat like statues, the blood draining from their faces. The cheap air freshener in the car suddenly smelled like impending doom. Say that again? Croft's voice was low, dangerous. You heard me, Rob. Pulled over for a phantom traffic violation, accused of matching the description for a burglary, and arrested when I questioned their probable cause. My name is Brigadier General Anita Hayes. My service number is 6275309. I am being detained by Officer Frank Miller, badge number 7114, and Officer Kevin Thompson, badge number 822. I am requesting immediate legal intervention from JAG and formal notification of this incident to the chairman's office. Each word was a hammer blow. She wasn't just calling for a lawyer. She was initiating a protocol. She was activating a system that the 2 small-town cops couldn't possibly comprehend. The mention of the chairman's office, the office of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, was the final nail in the coffin. Stay on the line, Anita, Croft said, his voice now glacially cold. Muffled sounds could be heard in the background, another phone being picked up, a door opening, a curt order being given. Consider it handled. The full weight of this department is coming your way. Are the officers with you? They are right here, General Hayes said, her eyes locking onto Miller's in the rearview mirror. Miller's hand was shaking as he held the phone. He looked like he had seen a ghost. Croft's voice boomed from the small speaker, filling the car with terrifying authority. Officers Miller and Thompson of the Oak Creek Police Department, you are currently in illegal detention of a general officer of the United States Army. You have approximately 5 minutes to release her unconditionally before you find yourselves at the center of a federal civil rights investigation that will be personally overseen by the Attorney General of the United States. The Secretary of Defense is being notified as we speak. Your careers, as you know them, are over. The clock is ticking. The line went dead. Miller dropped the phone as if it were red hot. He looked at Thompson, his face pale and slick with sweat. The smugness, the cynicism, the casual cruelty, it had all evaporated, replaced by raw, primal fear. He turned his head slowly and looked at the woman in his back seat. He wasn't seeing a suspect anymore. He was seeing the architect of his ruin. Get the keys, he whispered to Thompson, his voice hoarse. Get the keys and get her out of those cuffs, now. The 5 minutes Robert Croft had mentioned was an exaggeration. The unraveling began in less than 90 seconds. Officer Thompson fumbled with the handcuff key, his hands trembling so violently he could barely fit it into the lock. The click of the cuffs opening was the loudest sound in the world. As they fell away from General Hayes's wrists, red marks were clearly visible on her dark skin. She rubbed them absently, her expression unreadable. Before she had even stepped out of the patrol car, the police radio crackled to life, not with the calm, procedural voice of the dispatcher, but with the panicked shout of Chief of Police, Howard Reynolds. Miller! Thompson! What is your status? Talk to me now! Miller grabbed the radio, his voice cracking. Chief, we're on Elm Street. We made a traffic stop. I know where you are, Reynolds roared over the radio, a level of fury no one in the department had ever heard from him. I just got off the phone with the governor's office. Who did they get their call from? A 3-star general at the Pentagon who was practically breathing fire through the phone. What in God's name did you do? Neither officer could form a coherent answer. They were caught in the shockwave of a bomb they didn't even know they'd built. General Hayes stepped out of the cruiser and stood, brushing off her pantsuit as if removing a piece of lint. She didn't look at them. Her attention was on the black Lincoln Aviator, her personal space that had been violated. Within 2 minutes, the quiet suburban street resembled a scene from a movie. 2 more Oak Creek police cruisers screeched to a halt, boxing in Miller's vehicle. A black unmarked sedan followed, pulling up at a sharp angle. Chief Reynolds, a portly man whose face was now a blotchy, terrified red, burst out of the sedan before it had even fully stopped. He ignored his own officers completely and rushed toward General Hayes. "General! General Hayes?" he asked, his voice a mix of awe and terror. "I am so sorry. Chief Howard Reynolds. There has been a catastrophic misunderstanding." General Hayes finally turned her gaze to him. Her eyes were like chips of obsidian. "Chief Reynolds, your officers illegally detained me based on a fabricated pretext. They arrested me without cause. They put me in handcuffs. Misunderstanding is not the word I would use." Reynolds was sweating profusely, his uniform collar suddenly feeling 2 sizes too small. "No, of course not, General. It was unprofessional, unacceptable. The officers will be dealt with, I assure you, severely." He turned on Miller and Thompson, his fear transmuting into rage. "You two, give me your badges and your weapons, now! You're on administrative leave, effective immediately. Get in that car," he pointed to one of the newly arrived cruisers, "and get back to the station. Do not speak to anyone. Do not touch anything. Just sit in the briefing room until I get there." Miller and Thompson, their faces ashen, complied without a word. They were hollowed out, shells of the arrogant men they had been just 10 minutes prior. As they were driven away, they were no longer police officers. They were defendants in a case that had yet to be written. But the ordeal was far from over. As if on cue, a dark green vehicle with official U.S. government plates arrived. A man in a crisp suit and a woman in the Army service uniform of a lieutenant colonel stepped out. They were from the Judge Advocate General's Corps, the Army's legal arm. They had been dispatched from Fort Belvoir with unbelievable speed. The lieutenant colonel, a woman named Peterson, approached General Hayes and rendered a sharp salute. "General Hayes, Lieutenant Colonel Peterson, JAG Corps. Are you all right, ma'am?" "I'm unharmed, Colonel," Hayes replied, returning the salute. The familiar ritual seemed to ground her. "But I wish to file a formal complaint with the Oak Creek Police Department, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and the Department of Justice." The lawyer in the suit, a civilian from the DOJ who had clearly been scrambled from the D.C. office, stepped forward. "General David Chen, Civil Rights Division, will handle everything. The Attorney General has already been briefed." Chief Reynolds looked on, his world crumbling around him. The JAG Corps and the DOJ were here, on his street, in his town. This was no longer a local issue. This was a federal incident. He saw his career, his pension, his reputation, all circling a drain. General Hayes simply nodded. "Good. I need to go see my sister." She walked to her Lincoln, got in, and started the engine. As she pulled away from the curb, she glanced in her rearview mirror. The street was now a chaotic tableau of flashing lights, frantic officials, and the 2 disgraced officers being driven away. She had not raised her voice. She had not resisted. She had simply made a phone call. She had followed protocol. And the system she was a part of, a system built on order, discipline, and overwhelming force, had responded in kind. The immediate aftermath was over, but the real consequences, the slow, grinding, and merciless wheels of institutional justice, had only just begun to turn. The administrative leave for officers Miller and Thompson was merely the first pebble in an avalanche. What they thought would be a slap on the wrist and a few weeks of paid vacation while things blew over quickly turned into a full-scale forensic examination of their entire careers, and by extension, the entire Oak Creek Police Department. David Chen from the Department of Justice was not a man given to bluster or theatrics. He was a quiet, meticulous lawyer who believed that justice was found not in shouting matches, but in stacks of paper. He and his team descended on the Oak Creek PD with federal subpoenas that gave them access to everything. Personnel files, internal affairs records, dash cam footage, body cam data, and years of complaint histories. Chief Reynolds, trying to save his own skin, adopted a policy of full, fawning cooperation. "Anything you need, Mr. Chen. We are an open book," he'd say, forcing a smile. But he knew with a sickness in his gut what was hidden within that book. The first major break came from the body cam footage. Both Miller and Thompson had activated their cameras, as per policy. The video and audio corroborated General Hayes' account perfectly. It captured Miller's lie about the incomplete stop. It captured his sneering, condescending questions about her being a cook or a supply sergeant. It captured the moment he fabricated the story about a burglary suspect. And most damningly, it captured General Hayes' calm, legally precise questions, followed by Miller's angry escalation and the unjustified arrest. The audio of the phone call to the Pentagon was the centerpiece, a stunning recording of two careers imploding in real time. But Chen's team didn't stop there. They weren't just investigating one incident. They were looking for a pattern in practice. They began pulling every traffic stop Miller and Thompson had made in the last 3 years. The data was stark. Over 80% of their discretionary stops, those for minor judgment call infractions like incomplete stops or weaving within a lane, involved minority drivers. Over 95% of the escalations from these stops, where drivers were asked to exit their vehicle, involved black men and women. Then they found the files, the informal complaints. These were complaints made by citizens that never rose to the level of a full internal affairs investigation. Chief Reynolds had a habit of handling them himself, which meant listening to the citizen, promising to talk to the officer, and then burying the complaint in a locked file cabinet in his office. It was a way to keep the department's official record clean while allowing problematic officers to continue their behavior unchecked. Chen's subpoena covered that file cabinet. Inside were 17 complaints against Officer Frank Miller over a 10-year period. 12 of them were for harassment and illegal searches during traffic stops, all from minority citizens. One was from a young black man named Jamal Peters, who claimed Miller had pulled him over, accused him of smelling like marijuana, he was a non-smoker, and illegally searched his car, tearing up the upholstery on his seats. When he found nothing, Miller let him go with a ticket for a broken taillight that wasn't broken. Jamal's complaint had been dismissed by Reynolds as unsubstantiated. There were 4 complaints against Officer Kevin Thompson, even in his short tenure. They showed a clear pattern of a young officer emulating his senior partner, using aggressive language and fabricating reasons to search vehicles. He was a product of the toxic mentorship he'd received from Miller. The DOJ team brought Jamal Peters in for an interview. The young man, now a 24-year-old mechanic, was hesitant at first. He'd been taught that fighting the police was a losing battle. But when Chen's team played him the audio from General Hayes' stop, his eyes lit up with a fire of recognition. "That's him," Jamal said, pointing at the speaker. "That's the same voice, the same way he talked to me. Like I was dirt, like I couldn't possibly belong." Jamal's testimony and that of several other victims unearthed from the buried files became the cornerstone of the DOJ's case. It transformed the incident with General Hayes from a one-off mistake into the predictable outcome of a systemic problem. It was no longer about 2 bad cops. It was about a sick department led by a chief who actively enabled and concealed their misconduct. The media, which had initially reported the story as a brief, bizarre local news item, was now in a full-blown frenzy. National news outlets sent reporters to Oak Creek. The narrative shifted. It wasn't cops mistakenly arrest Army General. It became federal investigation exposes years of racial profiling in affluent Virginia suburb. The town of Oak Creek, which had prided itself on its pristine image, was now the center of a national scandal. For General Hayes, this was a difficult turn. She had not wanted the publicity. She had acted to correct an injustice done to her, using the channels available to her. But now, seeing the pattern of abuse that Chen's investigation had uncovered, she realized her incident was not just about her. It was about Jamal Peters. It was about the dozens of others who had been harassed and humiliated, but lacked a direct line to the Pentagon. She agreed to give a single formal statement to the DOJ to be released to the press. In it, she was concise and powerful. "I was one of many," the statement read. "The only difference between my experience and theirs is my rank. A citizen's rights should not be dependent on their title or their connections. The actions of these officers were not just an insult to me as a soldier, but to every citizen who believes in the rule of law. I have full faith that the Department of Justice will expose the truth and ensure that true accountability is achieved. Accountability. The word hung in the air over Oak Creek. For Miller, Thompson, and Chief Reynolds, it was no longer a question of if it would come, but how devastating it would be when it finally arrived. They had been exposed, their secrets laid bare by the unseen tapes and buried files, all brought to light because they chose to harass the wrong woman on the wrong day. The wheels of justice, once they began to grind in earnest, were both merciless and methodical. The careers of Frank Miller and Kevin Thompson were not just destroyed, they were systematically dismantled, leaving nothing but dust and dead in their wake. The hard karma the universe owed them arrived in a series of devastating, life-altering blows. Miller was the first to fall, and he fell the hardest. The Oak Creek Police Department, under immense pressure from the DOJ and the town council, fired him not for the arrest of General Hayes, but for a pattern of gross misconduct and violation of civil rights, citing the 17 previously buried complaints. By firing him for cause, they were able to strip him of his 20-year pension. The nest egg he had been counting on for his retirement vanished overnight. His union fought the termination, but the evidence, especially the body cam footage and the damning testimony from past victims, was insurmountable. The union quietly dropped his case, unwilling to spend political capital on an officer who had become a national symbol of police corruption. Legally, he was charged by the state with filing a false police report and unlawful imprisonment. He pleaded guilty to lesser charges to avoid jail time, but he was now a convicted misdemeanant, making him ineligible to carry a firearm. His law enforcement career was unequivocally over. No department in the country would hire him. The financial ruin was swift. Unable to find work that paid even a fraction of his police salary, he was forced to sell his house. His wife, who had stood by his cynical worldview for years, could not stand by the public humiliation and financial collapse. She left him. Miller, once the arrogant arbiter of law on the streets of Oak Creek, found himself working as a night watchman at a self-storage facility, living in a cheap apartment, his days filled with bitterness and his nights with the ghosts of his own making. The final indignity came when Jamal Peters, represented pro bono by a civil rights group, filed a civil suit against him. Miller, with no assets left, was forced to declare bankruptcy. He had lost everything: his job, his pension, his home, his family, and his name. Thompson's fate was more tragic, a lesson in the poison of hero worship. As a probationary officer, he was fired summarily. The department and the union offered him no protection. The DOJ investigation painted him as a willing accomplice, a student who had eagerly learned the worst lessons from his teacher. He was blacklisted from law enforcement. Every application he submitted was rejected the moment his name was run through the national database. His dream of being a cop, the only thing he had ever wanted to do, was dead. Unlike Miller, Thompson was racked with guilt. He had to face his family, who had been so proud when he joined the force, and explain that he had thrown it all away by participating in the harassment of a national hero. He gave a deposition to the DOJ, admitting everything: that he knew Miller's stop was pretextual, that he knew they had no reason to ask General Hayes to exit the car, and that he had gone along with it to impress his senior partner. He spiraled into a deep depression. He ended up leaving Virginia altogether, moving to a different state to escape the notoriety of his name. He found work in construction, his days spent in hard physical labor that gave him too much time to think about the moment he stood by and did nothing, the moment he chose the path of a bully over the path of an officer. His karma was not a loss of assets, but a lifetime of regret, the crushing knowledge that he had a chance to be good, and he chose to be weak. Chief Reynolds thought his cooperation would save him. He was wrong. The DOJ's final report on the Oak Creek Police Department was a scathing indictment of his leadership. It detailed his years-long practice of bearing complaints, his failure to discipline problem officers, and his cultivation of a culture that shielded misconduct from public view. He wasn't just a bystander. He was the architect of the system that made the Miller and Thompson incident inevitable. The Oak Creek Town Council, facing lawsuits and national disgrace, demanded his resignation. When he refused, they fired him. Like Miller, he was denied his severance package due to being terminated for cause. The informal complaint system he had created to protect his officers ended up being the evidence used to end his career. He retired in disgrace, his name forever linked to the scandal. His legacy was not one of a respected law enforcement leader, but of a man who prioritized a clean image over actual justice. The town of Oak Creek was forced to enter into a federal consent decree, a multi-year, multi-million-dollar agreement to have the DOJ oversee reforms and retraining of their entire police force. The department Reynolds had built had to be torn down to its foundations and rebuilt from scratch. The harvest had been reaped. For each man, the consequences were perfectly tailored to their sins. Miller, the cynical veteran, lost the financial security he valued. Thompson, the impressionable rookie, lost the dream he cherished. And Reynolds, the political chief, lost the reputation he had so carefully and corruptly curated. Their lives were destroyed not by a single phone call, but by the weight of their own choices, brought crashing down upon them by a woman who refused to be just another statistic. 1 year to the day after the arrest, a different kind of traffic stop took place on Elm Street in Oak Creek, Virginia. A young officer, Maria Rodriguez, approached a late-model sedan with a busted taillight. Her body camera was on, her demeanor was composed, and her voice was a model of professional courtesy. "Good afternoon, sir," she began. "Officer Rodriguez, Oak Creek PD. I've pulled you over because your rear passenger side taillight is out. I just wanted to make you aware of it for your safety." The driver, a nervous young black man, produced his documents. She ran them, found no issues, and returned them with a written warning and a friendly recommendation for a local auto shop. "Get it fixed as soon as you can. Have a safe day." The entire interaction lasted less than 4 minutes. It was professional, uneventful, and utterly unremarkable. And in the new Oak Creek, that was a victory. The department was in the 2nd year of its federal consent decree. Every officer had undergone hundreds of hours of new training. Officer Rodriguez had been hired by the new chief, a woman brought in from a larger, more diverse metropolitan area, specifically to gut the old culture and build a new one. The Miller-Thompson incident, as it was now known in the town's hushed lore, had become a cautionary tale whispered to every new recruit, a ghost story of how arrogance and prejudice could lead to absolute ruin. The town's pristine image was gone, replaced by the far more difficult, but ultimately more valuable, work of earning a reputation for fairness. Miles away in the hallowed grounds of the United States Military Academy at West Point, Major General Anita Hayes stood looking out a window at the iconic expanse of the plain. The promotion had come through 6 months ago, a recognition of her decades of flawless service. The single star on her shoulder had been replaced by 2. With the new rank came new responsibilities, including more public-facing duties like this one, delivering the keynote address at the graduation ceremony for the Academy's new second lieutenants. She adjusted the cuff of her immaculate Army service uniform. For months after the incident, she had resisted the spotlight. She declined interviews, ignored requests for book deals, and did her best to return to her duties. But the story had taken on a life of its own, becoming a symbol of a very specific kind of justice. She realized her silence was a luxury she could no longer afford. Her sister Rebecca, now in remission and with her strength returning, had been the one to convince her. "Anita," she'd said during one of their weekly calls, "you spent 30 years learning to command armies and advise presidents. You learned how to project strength without saying a word. Don't you think that's a lesson a lot of people need to learn right now? You didn't ask for this platform, but it's yours. Use it." So she did. She began accepting select speaking engagements, not to recount the tawdry details of her arrest, but to speak on the broader principles it had laid bare. Leadership, accountability, and the character required to wield authority, whether military or civil. A young captain knocked softly on the door. "Ma'am, it's time." She nodded, took one last look at the future of the Army, drilling on the field below, and followed him. As she walked onto the stage, a wave of thunderous applause rose from the sea of more than 1,000 cadets in their full-dress gray uniforms. She looked at their faces, young, eager, disciplined, from every state and every background. They were the rock upon which the nation's defense was built. And looking at them, she felt the immense weight of her duty not just to command, but to mold. When the applause subsided, she stepped to the podium, her presence alone commanding a reverent silence. Superintendent, distinguished faculty, proud families, and most importantly, the class of 2026, she began, her voice calm and clear, carrying across the vast field. It is the highest honor of my career to stand before you today. You have been forged in the crucible of this esteemed institution. You have been taught strategy, history, ethics, and the art of war. Today I want to talk to you about the art of peace. Not the peace you will negotiate in a foreign land, but the peace you must first find within your own character as a leader. She paused, letting the words settle. Leadership, you see, is not about the authority vested in your rank. It is not about the uniform you wear or the orders you can give. That is merely management. True leadership is revealed when those things are stripped away. It is tested not when you are leading a platoon into battle, but when you are alone in a quiet room, faced with a decision that no one else will ever see. It is defined by how you act when you have all the power and the person in front of you has none. She thought of Miller and Thompson, of their casual cruelty and their pathetic abuse of a sliver of authority. They were managers of their own little fiefdom, not leaders. The uniform you wear, she continued, her gaze sweeping across the cadets, is more than cloth and thread. It is a symbol of a sacred trust between the American people and the defenders of their Constitution. They trust that you will be disciplined, that you will be honorable, and that you will be just. That trust is fragile. It takes a lifetime to build and only a moment of arrogance to shatter. Every single action you take from this day forward will either strengthen that trust or erode it. There is no middle ground. Her mind drifted to Jamal Peters. After the DOJ investigation had concluded, she had worked through David Chen to establish an anonymous educational grant for victims of police misconduct in Oak Creek. Chen had told her that Jamal was the first recipient, using the funds to get a certification in advanced auto diagnostics. He was now the head mechanic at a large dealership. Chen had forwarded her a letter from the young man. To the anonymous donor, it read, "You didn't just give me money for school. You gave me back a piece of my faith that the world can be fair. You showed me that for every person who tries to tear you down, there's someone else willing to help build you up. Thank you." That letter meant more to her than any medal. It was a tangible piece of evidence that the ripple from that ugly incident could in fact be turned into a positive wave. "You will be sent to every corner of this world," she told the cadets, her voice rising with passion. "And you will be asked to make impossible decisions in chaotic situations. But I will tell you this, the most dangerous enemy you will ever face is not on the other side of a battlefield. It is the enemy within. It is the poison of assumption. It is the arrogance of believing your power makes you infallible. It is the quiet voice that tells you to take a shortcut on the path of integrity because you think no one is watching. I assure you, someone is always watching, and the person who should be watching most closely is you. When you are given power over others, you are not being given a weapon. You are being given a responsibility to see the humanity in everyone, to act with dignity, and to remember that the rule of law is the foundation of the very freedom you have sworn to defend. When you violate that law in the name of enforcing it, you become the very thing you are fighting against. You create a crack in the foundation, and enough cracks will bring the entire house down. She concluded her speech not with a flourish, but with a simple, direct charge. So go forth from this place and be leaders. Be the rock of integrity in your units. Be the quiet professional whose character speaks louder than their commands. Build trust, eradicate injustice, and serve this nation with the honor it deserves. Thank you." The standing ovation that followed was immediate and deafening. As she stepped back from the podium, she felt not a sense of triumph, but a sober sense of completion. The incident in Oak Creek was a closed chapter. It had ended with ruin for those who had abused their power, but it had also started a new chapter of reform for a broken department. It had provided a small measure of justice for Jamal Peters and others, and it had given her this platform, this chance to shape the next generation of leaders. She knew she had not been targeted that day because she was a general. She had been targeted because she was a black woman who in the officer's eyes looked out of place. Her rank was simply the tool she had been forced to use. It was the rock she had in her hand to stop a destructive force. But her ultimate goal, she now realized, was to help create a world where such rocks were not needed. A world where justice was not dependent on a phone call to the Pentagon, but was the ordinary everyday standard for every single citizen on every quiet suburban street. The work was far from over, but a ripple had been sent out, and it was still moving. The story of General Anita Hayes is a stark and powerful reminder that true strength isn't about shouting the loudest, but about knowing precisely which levers of power to pull. It shows how the discipline and character forged over a lifetime can be a person's ultimate weapon against injustice. This wasn't a story of revenge, but of consequences. It was the inevitable outcome when a corrupt and prejudiced system ran headfirst into an immovable object of integrity and authority. The careers of those officers weren't destroyed by a phone call. They were incinerated by the light of accountability that the call switched on. If this story of justice and consequence resonated with you, and if you believe that no one is above the law, then please take a moment to hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel for more true stories of when the system, for better or for worse, actually works. And let me know in the comments below. Which part of this story stood out to you the most? Was it the general's calm demeanor or the swift and total collapse of the officer's world? Thank you for listening.